I never imagined a blizzard could change my life so completely. It was 1888, and Montana was being swallowed by one of the harshest winters God had ever sent. Our frontier town, a lonely speck called Silver Creek, clung to the jagged mountains like a stubborn weed, where the cold didn't just bite at the skin, it seeped straight into the soul, making everything feel as fragile as the thin ice over the river. I was Eleanor Whitaker, only daughter of the man who owned the town's lone general store. My life then felt like a single, fraying thread, stretched between the heavy expectations of a judgmental community and the quiet loneliness gnawing at my heart. That night the wind howled like lost spirits, whipping blinding snow through the muddy streets. I stood behind the counter, ledger in hand, trying to tally the day's sales. Our store was the town's lifeline, selling everything from thick wool blankets to keep deathly cold at bay, to flour for bread, hunting gear for the brave souls who dared the wild, and whiskey. The golden fire my father swore was the only medicine for a man's spirit in winters like these. But that whiskey was my curse. Folks in town, strict church-going Christians, whispered behind my back. A decent girl shouldn't be dealing in the devil's drink, they said. Martha Jenkins, our pious neighbor who came by for flour, once looked at me with pity and quiet scorn. "Eleanor, you ought to find yourself a good husband and get out of this place before your name's ruined for good." I tried to ignore them, but their words cut deep over time. Behind the store was a small saloon where rough men gathered after long days of mining and hunting. Laughter, clinking glasses, and the haze of smoke and whiskey filled the air. I stayed clear of it, but in a town this small, nothing stays secret. Old Sam Harlan, a weathered miner who sat in the corner most nights, once smirked as I passed and said, "Little Whitaker, you're a rose among wolves. Careful, wolves bite." Comments like that made me feel like an outsider in my own home. My father, Thomas Whitaker, a widower with silver hair and weary eyes, always shielded me, but even he knew the town's unspoken rules were unbreakable without a price. Then the nightmare began. I was wiping the counter when a gunshot split the howl of the storm. My heart thundered as I looked through the frosted window. Right outside, just steps away, the town bank was under attack. 3 masked riders, guns blazing, galloped hard through the storm, firing into the air to scatter the crowd. I saw poor Henry Caldwell, the bank clerk, crumple into the snow, his chest blooming red. Panic erupted. Townsfolk screamed and scattered. I froze, gripping the counter's edge. Then one outlaw turned, his gaze cutting straight through the glass, straight at me. "The girl saw my face!" he roared to the others. My blood ran cold. They spurred their horses and tore off, but one wheeled back, his horse shrieking against the wind. I didn't think. I ran. Throwing on my cloak, I bolted out the back door into the black and white chaos. The wind slashed like knives. Snow stung my eyes and stole my breath. "Stop, you little bastard!" the outlaw's voice roared behind me. Gunfire cracked. A bullet hissed past my ear, hot as fire. I ran harder, lungs burning, but the cold gnawed my strength. The town vanished behind me, swallowed by the storm. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving or die. The images of the robbery haunted me. Henry's blood, the screams, the outlaw's merciless eyes. Why me? Why did I have to see this? Tears froze on my cheeks. Maybe this was my punishment for living outside their proper rules. The whiskey girl who didn't fit. The outlaw's horse thundered closer. Another shot cracked the air, deafening and wild. Terror clawed through me. I stumbled on thin ice covering a creek and plunged into freezing black water. The shock stole my breath, stabbing my skin like needles. I fought to pull myself out, but my ankles screamed with pain. I can't die here. I thought of father waiting, of dreams I hadn't lived yet. But strength drained fast. The town's cruel whispers echoed in my head. Drinking girl, not worthy of a decent man. They hurt worse than the cold. I collapsed onto the snow, vision fading into darkness. When I woke, the first thing I felt was warmth. Shocking, unfamiliar. I lay wrapped in thick wool blankets on a rough bed beside a blazing fire. Pine smoke and heat filled the small cabin. Outside, the blizzard still howled. A man sat nearby, tall and broad-shouldered, eyes the color of cold mountain lakes fixed on me. He wore a weather-beaten leather coat, black hair in disarray, and a scar ran long across his cheek. A man who looked like he'd stepped out of one of my father's Wild West tales. "You're awake," he said in a low, steady drawl. "Name's Jack Thornton," You nearly froze out there. Panic shot through me. I sat up too fast, dizzy and afraid. Who are you? Why am I here? I scanned the rough little cabin. A rifle hung on the wall, steel traps stacked in the corner, the faint smell of roasted meat lingering. Jack explained. He'd heard the gunfire and screams, fought through the storm, and found me half dead. But he'd also crossed paths with the outlaw. He tried to cut me off, Jack said calmly, as if talking about the weather. I had to shoot him before he pulled the trigger. I pictured it, this lone stranger braving the white fury to face a killer. But doubt gnawed at me. Are you one of them? Why save me? Years of small-town judgment made me wary. A lone girl, alone with a strange man. My reputation would be ashes if word got out. Yet sitting there in that quiet cabin with life seeping back into my frozen bones, I wasn't sure whether to fear him or trust him. Jack shook his head, a flicker of pain crossing his blue eyes. I ain't a bad man, Eleanor, he said quietly. I live out here alone 'cause I lost my family in the great fire back in the old town. Flames took everything. My father, my mother, my little sister. I came out here to forget, or at least try. His words pierced something deep inside me. I too carried my own loss. My mother died giving birth to me, leaving just father and me to fight this harsh world. As we talked, a strange bond began to form, a fragile thread of shared grief pulling us closer together. But peace never lasts long in the West. The storm finally began to break, and Jack decided to take me back to town. On the way, a sudden avalanche roared down the mountainside, burying the trail and nearly taking us with it. Snow crashed around us like a living beast. Jack threw himself over me, shielding me with his own body. Hold on to me, he whispered, his warm breath brushing my ear, sending a tremor through my chest that had nothing to do with fear. When we finally returned to Silver Creek, the town was in an uproar over the bank robbery. My father ran to me, tears streaking his weathered cheeks. My girl, God has spared you. But the whispers started almost immediately. Martha Jenkins and old Sam Harlan stood near the store, whispering loud enough for all to hear. She spent the night alone with that Thornton fellow. What's left of the Whitaker name now? Father's joy turned to suspicion under the crushing weight of gossip. He faced Jack with hard eyes. What have you done to my daughter? Jack stood tall, calm but firm. I saved her life, sir, but the tide of judgment was unstoppable. That night, Father, his face lined with both fear and pride, told me, to save the family's honor, you must marry this man, Eleanor. And so we wed in haste, in the small wooden church under the town's cold, watchful eyes. My white dress was plain. My hands trembled as Jack took them into his. I'll protect you, he whispered, his eyes gentle, full of a quiet respect that sparked the faintest hope of love. Life in Jack's cabin began with a shy, awkward silence. He hunted, I kept the home. Yet the town's judgment haunted us still, echoing in every visit from Father. But slowly, Jack opened up, telling me more about the fire, about the crushing grief that drove him into solitude. I shared my own loneliness. In those quiet nights by the hearth, we built something fragile but real. Then came new trials. A brutal ice storm ripped the roof from our cabin. We fought the cold together, but I injured my hand badly and nearly faced infection. And when we thought we had survived that, the past came back with a vengeance. The same outlaws returned to finish what they'd started. Jack met them with guns blazing. Faster than I'd ever thought a man could be, dropping 2 of them in a heartbeat. I watched, frozen in shock and awe, as he defended our little home with raw, fearless skill. When it was over, he knelt beside me, tending to my wound with trembling hands. We clung to each other, fear melting into trust. You're my light, Eleanor, he whispered. And for the first time, I truly believed him. But the West doesn't allow peace for long. In the quiet days after that gunfight, the cabin felt like our own fragile world, warm despite the winter's chill. I lay in bed, hands still aching but comforted by Jack's arms and the steady crackle of the fire. His promise, "You're my light," echoed in my heart. Yet somewhere beyond those walls, shadows were stirring. The next morning, Jack rose early, as always, shrugging into his worn leather coat and checking his rifle. "Reckon I'll ride into town today, darlin'," he said in that warm, slow drawl. "Need supplies? Maybe see how your paw's holding up." I nodded, hiding my unease. Silver Creek was still a nest of judgment, its whispers about the whiskey girl and the hermit Thornton sharp as knives. But I didn't want him to worry, so I just smiled faintly. "Be careful out there, Jack. It's still mighty cold." When he left, the cabin's silence pressed heavy. I sat by the fire, thinking about how far we'd come, from suspicion and fear to this fragile, growing love. Jack wasn't a villain. He was a man scarred by loss like me. "We've both been through hell, Eleanor," he'd once told me, "but maybe together we can find our way out." Those words lit a small, steady flame in me, but then came the shadow. Jack returned late that afternoon, his face dark as a thunderhead. "Something's brewing in town," he muttered, setting his pack down. "The talk about us, it's worse now." A name surfaced like a curse. Silas Blackwood, an old hunting partner of Jack's before the fire. Silas had slithered back to Silver Creek spreading venom. He claimed the fire that killed Jack's family wasn't an accident, that Jack himself had lit it to claim some hidden inheritance. Worse, he twisted my rescue into scandal. That Jack had taken advantage of me to hide his dark past, and that I, the whiskey girl, had fallen into sin with a killer. The rumors caught like dry prairie grass. Father sent a letter through a neighbor boy, his words heavy with worry. "The town's boycotting my store, Eleanor. They say no decent Christian will trade with a family tied to a murderer." Suddenly, it wasn't just whispers. It was a noose tightening around our lives. "Why now?" I whispered to Jack that night by the fire. He held me close, but there was a shadow in his eyes. A secret left unspoken. "Silas has a grudge," he said slowly, "but reckon there's more he's after." A chilling thought formed in my mind. Could Jack's past somehow be tied to the bank robbery I'd witnessed? I didn't dare ask, but the doubt gnawed at me, warring with the love I felt. Days passed. Our cabin became a fortress, but Silas didn't stop at lies. One morning, as the snow softened under the first weak sun of spring, I went to fetch water from the creek. The air smelled of wet earth and hope. I imagined a small garden, a new start. Then, a rough hand clamped over my mouth. "Don't scream, missy," a foul voice rasped behind me. Two burly men in black kerchiefs dragged me into the woods. "Boss wants a word," one sneered. Terror clawed through me as they shoved me deep into the forest, memories of blood and gunfire flooding back. I tried to cry out, "Jack!" but their grip was iron. They hauled me to a hidden rock cave where Silas Blackwood waited. Tall, broad, his gray hair wild and eyes burning with hate, he smirked when he saw me. "Well, well, Mrs. Thornton, or should I say the Whitaker girl who's fallen so far?" Then the truth came crashing down. The first bank robbery, the one I'd witnessed, hadn't been random. Silas had orchestrated it, and he knew I had seen too much that night. "You saw my boys at the bank," he growled. "Now you and Thornton are a loose end." He meant to use me as bait, to lure Jack into a trap and finally settle an old score. Years ago, Jack had refused to join Silas's gang. The fire, Silas hinted darkly, was no accident. But his story twisted truth and lie into a poisonous weapon. "He thinks he's a hero now," Silas sneered. "But I'll break him and take everything." They tied me up in that freezing cave, leaving me weak and shaking with cold and fear. I didn't know if Jack could find me or if this was where my story ended, but Jack was no ordinary man. When he discovered I was missing, his instincts blazed alive. He tracked me through the snow, riding hard into the wild with his revolver ready. The woods became a battlefield. Silas's men ambushed him. Bullets ripped through the trees. One struck Jack's shoulder, blood soaking his coat, but he fought on, relentless, deadly. "Come out, Thornton," Silas roared. Jack, wounded but unbroken, fired back with precision, dropping one of the thugs before charging toward the cave. Gunfire echoed like thunder as Jack burst in. He and Silas faced off, two men bound by old pain and betrayal. One final shot rang out. Silas fell, his eyes wide with shock, while Jack staggered, bleeding but alive. He cut my ropes, pulled me into his arms. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, tears, rare, raw, streaking his face. In that dark cave, with danger finally slain, every doubt in my heart burned away. Our love, born in storm and forged through fire, had proven unbreakable.